Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. These stories take time, care, and deep research to bring to life, and your support is what keeps them coming. In the lowlands of Louisiana, where the air hung thick with heat and the land never truly dried, there stood a plantation the locals avoided naming out loud. It sat just beyond a bend in the river, surrounded by cypress trees whose roots rose from the swamp like grasping fingers. Travelers passed it without slowing. Even neighboring planters spoke of it in half-sentences, their voices dropping whenever its name threatened to surface, not because of what happened there publicly, but because of one rule, a rule so absolute, so quietly enforced, that no one remembered when it began, only that it had never been broken without consequence. The plantation was known as Belrive, a sprawling sugar estate built on land that never slept. The fields worked day and night during harvest season, blades cutting cane beneath moonlight, sweat soaking through shirts before dawn ever came. Life there followed strict routines. Bells rang, whistles blew, work began and ended on time. On the surface, it was orderly, efficient, almost calm. But beneath that calm lived something else. Every enslaved person brought to Belrive learned the rule within their first week. It wasn't written down. It wasn't announced loudly. No overseer barked it with a whip in hand. Instead, it was passed quietly, mouth to ear, usually at night. There is a place you do not go. They call it the North House, a small, windowless structure standing apart from the main quarters, half hidden by hanging moss and shadow. It had once been part of the original plantation, built decades earlier for reasons no one could clearly explain. By the time the story begins, it served no visible purpose at all. No tools were stored there. No animals were kept inside. No supplies ever came out. And yet, the door was always locked. The rule was simple. No one entered the North House. Not for cleaning. Not for repairs. Not even if ordered. Because no one ever was. What made the rule terrifying wasn't its strictness. It was the way it was obeyed. Even the overseers avoided the place. Even the master himself, Edmund Claiborne, owner of Belrive, never went near it in daylight. He passed it quickly when riding the property, eyes forward, posture stiff, as though the building might notice his attention. Claiborne was not a man known for fear. He was practical, controlled, and ruthless in a quiet way. He believed rules existed to be enforced, not explained. But when it came to the North House, he offered no explanation at all. He simply ensured everyone understood. The rule was older than him. Among the enslaved workers was a man named Caleb. Caleb had been brought to Belrive from upriver just before his 30th year. He was tall, observant, and slower to speak than most, a habit learned from years of listening more than talking. He worked the cane fields during the day and was assigned to night transport during harvest, hauling loads to the mill under torchlight. It was during those night hours that Caleb first noticed how the plantation changed after dark. Sounds carried differently. Whispers traveled farther, and the North House seemed closer. From certain angles, it looked like it leaned inward, as though listening. The first time Caleb asked about it, the response was immediate. An older man named Jonah grabbed his arm, so hard it left bruises. "You don't ask about that," Jonah hissed. "You don't look at it. You don't think about it." Caleb tried to laugh it off, but Jonah didn't let go. "Men who get curious don't stay men long," he said. "And some don't stay at all." That was all Jonah would say. Over time, Caleb noticed patterns. Whenever someone worked near the North House, cutting brush, repairing fences, their assignment was changed the next day. Quietly, permanently. No one ever worked there twice. If someone lingered too long near the building, an overseer would appear without warning. No shouting, no whip, just a look and a short command. "Move on." And everyone did. The women avoided that part of the land entirely. Mothers pulled children away without explanation. Songs stopped when footsteps passed too close. Even prayers sounded different in that direction. Lower, faster, unfinished. The strangest part was that nothing ever came from the North House. No screams. No smoke, no movement, just silence. That silence did something to people. It made them imagine. Some believed the building was cursed, that it sat on land taken from the dead. Others whispered that it held records or bones, or something brought from another country that should never have crossed the ocean. A few believed it was empty, and that emptiness itself was the point. Caleb didn't know what to believe, but he knew this. The rule shaped everything. It shaped where people walked, where they stood, where they looked. And one night, during the peak of harvest season, the rule was tested. It happened without warning. A young man named Eli, newly arrived and still untrained in Bell Rive's unspoken laws, was sent to retrieve a missing mule. The animal had wandered near the tree line, close to the north house. Eli hesitated. Everyone did, but the overseer was watching. So he went. Torches flickered. The swamp hummed with insects. Caleb watched from a distance as Eli moved closer to the building than anyone had in years. He stopped. He turned, and for a moment, it looked like he might say something. Then the north house door moved. Not opened, just shifted. The torchlight didn't reach inside. But Eli stepped back so suddenly he fell. The mule bolted. The overseer shouted. By the time they reached him, Eli was shaking, not crying, not screaming, just shaking. His eyes wouldn't focus. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He was taken away before dawn. No explanation was given. Eli never returned to the fields. And the next morning, a quiet order passed through Bell Rive like fog through Cain. The rule still stands. Caleb understood then that the rule wasn't about punishment. It was about containment, whatever the North House held or had held. It was something Bell Rive feared more than rebellion, more than escape, more than death itself. And for the first time, Caleb wondered not what would happen if the rule was broken, but why it had been made in the first place. After Eli disappeared, Bell Rive changed in ways that were hard to name but impossible to ignore. Work continued. It always did. The cane still fell beneath blades, wagons still rolled toward the mill, and the river kept sliding past the plantation as if nothing on land mattered to it. But people spoke less. Laughter thinned. Even arguments faded quickly, cut short by uneasy silence, because now the rule was no longer abstract. It had touched someone real. Caleb found himself thinking about Eli during the long nights. Not about what Eli might have seen, but about what he hadn't been able to say. Whatever froze his voice had done so instantly, like something reaching inside and gripping words before they could form. That kind of fear didn't come from stories. It came from certainty. Jonah noticed a change in Caleb. "You're listening too hard," he warned one night as they rested near the quarters. That's how trouble starts. Caleb didn't argue, but he asked the question anyway, softly, carefully. "Who made the rule?" Jonah's jaw tightened. He stared past Caleb, toward the dark stretch of trees where the North House waited. "Not the current master," he said. "Not his father, either." "Then who?" Jonah hesitated longer this time. "The first Claiborne," he finally said. "The one who came here before the land was cleared, before the river bend was map proper." According to Jonah, the plantation hadn't always been Bell Rive. It began as a much smaller holding, barely surviving its early years. The land flooded unpredictably. Crops failed. Workers fell ill for reasons no one understood. Some said the swamp itself resisted being owned. The first Claiborne, Augustus Claiborne, was known as a man obsessed with order. He believed chaos could be beaten into submission if rules were strict enough. He kept detailed journals, measured everything twice, and punished deviations harshly. But even he encountered something he couldn't command. Jonah had heard the story from his grandfather, who'd heard it from another before him, passed down the same way the rule was. Quietly, carefully, and only to those old enough to understand the cost of knowing. Augustus Claiborne built the North House during the plantation's worst year. Men were disappearing from the fields, not running, not dying, just gone. Tools were found abandoned. Footprints led into the swamp and ended abruptly, as if the ground itself swallowed them. At night, strange sounds carried across the water. Low, rhythmic, not quite voices, not quite animals. Claiborne believed someone or something was trespassing on his land. So he did what he always did. He tried to contain it. The North House was built fast. Too fast for something meant to last. No windows. Thick walls. Heavy iron locks brought from New Orleans at great expense. Whatever Claiborne intended to do there, he wanted no witnesses and no interruptions. What happened next was never described clearly, only that the disappearances stopped, the sound stopped, and Claiborne issued the rule. No one enters the North House, ever. Not servants, not overseers, not family. Jonah leaned closer when he said the next part. They say Claiborne went inside once, only once, and when he came out, he locked himself, threw away the key, and never spoke of it again. Caleb felt a chill despite the heat. Then why keep it at all, he asked. Why not tear it down? Jonah gave a humorless smile. Because some things don't like being disturbed, he said. And some cages only work if you pretend they're permanent. From that night on, Caleb paid closer attention, not to the North House itself, but to the people around it. He noticed how the master's family avoided that section of the land, even during daytime picnics or inspections. How repairs were made around the building, never touching it. How new overseers were warned in private before their first full tour. And he noticed something else. The plantation's discipline was different near the North House. Escapes were punished harshly everywhere. But rumor said that anyone caught attempting to flee near that area was never publicly whipped or sold. They simply vanished from the records. Their names stopped being spoken, as if the rule extended beyond walls. Then came the storm. Late summer in Louisiana meant sudden violence from the sky. Rain fell hard and fast, turning fields into rivers and paths into mud. One night, lightning split a tree less than 100 yards from the North House, setting it ablaze. Fire was dangerous. Fire spread. Overseers rushed to control it, shouting orders. Buckets were passed. Men were sent running. And for the first time in living memory, someone was ordered toward the North House. The fire had jumped close, too close. If it reached the building, no one knew what might happen. Panic cracked the usual calm, and in that crack, an overseer made a mistake. "Get water there, now!" he shouted, pointing directly at the North House. The men froze, not from disobedience, from terror. Seconds stretched. Rain poured. The fire crept. Then something happened that none of them expected. The order was withdrawn, not by the overseer, but by the master himself. Edmund Claiborne rode into the rain, coat soaked, face pale. He took one look at where the fire was heading and raised his hand. "No," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "Let it burn around." Someone protested, said the building would be lost. Claiborne didn't even look at him. "That building does not burn," he said quietly. "Not by us." They redirected efforts. Trees fell. Mud was thrown. The fire was contained just short of the North House. When it was over, Claiborne remained mounted, staring at the untouched door as rain hissed against the ground. Caleb was close enough to see his hands shaking. That was the moment Caleb understood the rule was not about control. It was about fear. Fear passed down like property, maintained like land, guarded like a secret that could not survive daylight. And somewhere inside that locked room was the reason Belle Rive existed at all. Because plantations were built to extract labor. But rules like this were built to hold something in. And Caleb knew, deep in his bones, that the rule would not last forever. Rules never do. By the time autumn settled over Belle Rive, the rule had begun to feel less like a boundary and more like a presence. It followed people. Caleb noticed it in small ways first. Conversations that stopped when someone glanced north. Children corrected sharply if they wandered too close. New arrivals, both enslaved and free, learned the rule before they learned where to sleep. Don't go there. Don't ask why. And yet, the closer Caleb paid attention, the clearer it became that the North House was not dormant. It was waiting. The first sign came from the animals. Horses refused to pass the narrow dirt path that led near the building, even when led by experienced hands. They balked, eyes rolling, hooves digging into the soil as if the ground itself burned them. Dogs whined and pulled away, tails tucked, no matter how well trained. Animals had no stories to inherit, only instincts. Then came the sounds. Not loud, never loud, just enough to be noticed if the night was quiet and the wind turned the wrong way. A slow, hollow rhythm, like breathing that didn't belong to the chest. Sometimes a dull scrape, as if something heavy shifted its weight inside. Once, Caleb swore he heard a knock, not from outside. From within, he told no one. Speaking it aloud felt dangerous, like naming a storm before it arrived. But he wasn't the only one who noticed. Miriam, one of the older women in the quarters, began leaving small bundles of herbs near the edge of the cleared land. She said nothing about them, but Caleb saw the way she placed them, carefully, respectfully, like offerings rather than protection. Jonah warned him again. "Curiosity won't save you," he said. "It only tells you when to be afraid." Caleb wanted to believe that. Then the ledger disappeared. Plantation records were kept in a locked office near the main house. Every birth, sale, punishment, and death was written down meticulously. Names mattered there, even when lives did not. One morning, the overseer stormed out of the office, shouting. A particular ledger, old, brittle, dating back to the plantation's earliest years, was missing. No broken locks, no signs of entry. It was simply gone. The master orders search. The fields, the quarters, the storage rooms, even the riverbanks. No one searched the north house. No one suggested it. But that night, Caleb saw something that made his stomach turn. A book, dark leather, swollen from age, lay near the tree line, half buried in mud, pages torn, ink smeared, the missing ledger. And the trail that led to it did not come from the main house. It came from the north. The next morning, the ledger was quietly returned to its shelf. No explanation was given. The overseer's anger vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The master did not ask questions. It was as if acknowledging the movement of that book would mean acknowledging something far worse. Caleb began to understand the shape of the truth. The north house was not simply locked. It was active. Whatever had been sealed inside all those years ago was not inert. It interacted with the plantation, not openly, not violently, but deliberately, choosing moments, choosing objects, choosing people. And sometimes it chose paths. One evening, as fog rolled in from the river, Caleb found footprints near the edge of the cleared land. Bare feet, deep impressions as if the walker was heavy, or dragging something heavier still. They led toward the north house, then stopped. No return prints. Just an absence, like the ground itself had decided not to remember. That night, Caleb dreamed. He stood in front of the north house door. The iron was cold beneath his hand. He knew, without knowing how, that the door was not locked from the outside. It was locked from within. A voice spoke behind the wood. Calm, patient. You keep the rules so well, it said. That is why it still works. Caleb woke drenched in sweat, the echo of the voice lingering long after dawn. Days later, something unprecedented happened. A child went missing. Not a field hand. Not someone old enough to wander alone. A girl no more than 9, named Eliza. She had been playing near the quarters at midday within sight of others. One moment she was there, braiding grass into loops. The next, she wasn't. Panic spread fast. Search parties formed immediately. Shouts echoed across the fields. The river was checked. The cane rows were torn apart. And then silence, because someone found her shoe. Near the north house. Not close enough to accuse the building. Just close enough to remind everyone of the rule. The master arrived quickly, face drawn, eyes dark. He listened to reports without speaking, then issued orders that made no sense to anyone but him. The search was called off before nightfall. Eliza's name was added to the ledger, and the rule was repeated, louder this time. No one is allowed near the north house, for any reason. That night, the quarters were silent, not with sleep, but with something heavier, grief mixed with guilt, fear layered over anger. Caleb sat awake, staring toward the dark horizon where the building stood, unseen but unmistakably present. For the first time, he felt something shift inside him, not curiosity, resolve. The rule had been obeyed for generations, and in return, it had taken what it wanted anyway. Eli, the ledger, Eliza. Obedience had not protected them. It had only fed whatever lived behind that door. Caleb realized then what the masters already knew, but never admitted. The rule wasn't meant to protect people from the North House. It was meant to protect the North House from people, from questions, from witnesses, from interruption. And if that was true, then breaking the rule wouldn't bring disaster. It would bring exposure. Somewhere, someone had to be the first to stop pretending the cage didn't exist. As the wind shifted, Caleb made a quiet decision. One he did not speak, even to himself. If the rule demanded silence, then silence had already failed. And whatever waited behind that locked door had grown comfortable in the dark. Too comfortable. The night Caleb chose was quiet in the wrong way. No wind, no insects. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. He didn't tell Jonah, didn't tell Miriam. Some decisions grew weaker when shared, and this one needed to stay sharp. He waited until the quarters settled into uneasy sleep, then slipped away with nothing but a lantern and a resolve that fell heavier with every step. The path toward the North House was narrower than he remembered, swallowed by shadow. Trees leaned inward, their branches knitting together overhead, turning the sky into a thin, distant line. The air grew colder the closer he came, not cooler, but emptier, as if warmth had learned to avoid this place. The building emerged slowly, its shape resolving from darkness. Up close, it was worse than any story. The walls were thick, uneven, scarred by age and weather. No windows, no gaps. The door, iron-banded and scarred with marks that looked less like rust and more like something that had been dragged across it repeatedly, stood perfectly still. Caleb raised the lantern. The flame wavered, and then, from inside, something answered. Not a sound, not movement. Pressure. A weight settled into the air, pressing against his chest, his throat, his thoughts. His first instinct was to flee, to run until the trees opened and the rule wrapped back around him like a familiar lie. Instead, he reached for the handle. It was cold, not just the touch. Cold in a way that seemed to drain heat through bone. The door was not locked. That truth landed harder than any fear. Caleb pulled. The door opened inward with a slow, deliberate groan, as if it had been waiting centuries for chance. Inside, the lantern light revealed a single room. No furniture, no chains, no altar or markings like the rumors claimed. Just walls and writing. Every surface was covered, floor to ceiling, with words carved deep into the stone. Names, dates, descriptions, some neat and careful, others jagged and frantic, as if etched by hands shaking with urgency. These were not prayers. They were records. Caleb stepped inside, heart pounding, and the door closed behind him on its own. The air shifted. The pressure eased. And the voice returned, not aloud, but inside his thoughts, clearer than ever before. You came because the rule failed you. Caleb swallowed. I came because it failed everyone, he said, surprised by the steadiness of his voice. The presence didn't deny it. Instead, images rose in his mind, uninvited, overwhelming. Augustus Claiborne, younger, desperate, watching his plantation collapse under illness, disappearances, and panic. Men dying in ways he could not explain. Land that refused obedience. Then discovery. Not a creature, not a curse, but a truth Claiborne could not accept. Something beneath the land. Something old, not evil, not alive in any human sense, but aware, responsive. It answered exploitation with consequence, took what was taken from it, balanced scales that humans pretended didn't exist. Claiborne couldn't destroy it. So he did what he always did. He contained the knowledge of it. The North House wasn't a prison for the thing beneath the land. It was a prison for the understanding of it. The room was built to record the cost, every disappearance, every consequence, every moment the land answered cruelty with its own kind of justice. And the rule kept the truth from spreading. If they knew, the presence whispered, they would have to change. Caleb understood now why the masters feared the room, why they maintained the lie generation after generation. The plantation survived not because it dominated the land, but because the truth was buried, compartmentalized, blamed on superstition instead of cause. Eli had come too close. Eliza had wandered into a place where balance was corrected without mercy. The presence did not apologize. It did not threaten. It simply was. "What happens now?" Caleb asked. The wall seemed to lean inward, the carved names catching the lantern light. "Hundreds of lives reduced to proof. Now the rule ends," the presence replied. "Or it continues. That choice is no longer mine." Caleb looked at the writing again, at the careful entries near the beginning, at the desperate scratches near the end. Silence had kept the plantation standing, but it had also kept the suffering orderly, repeatable, invisible. He lifted the lantern higher. Then he did the unthinkable. He began to read the names aloud. The effect was immediate. The air trembled, not violently, but like a breath finally released. The pressure shifted outward, away from the room, rolling across the land in a slow, unseen wave. Caleb opened the door and stepped out, continuing to speak. The night answered, not with screams, not with fire, but with awakening. Across Belle Rive, people stirred. Dreams shattered. Animals cried out. The river surged harder against its banks. The ground itself seemed to remember everything it had been forced to forget. By morning, the plantation was changed, not destroyed. Changed. The north house still stood, but its door remained open. The master ordered it sealed again. The overseers refused. The rule was never spoken after that day. And slowly, quietly, Belle Rive began to unravel, not in chaos. In truth, records surfaced. Stories spread. Land was abandoned where crops refused to grow. The Claiborne family left within the decade, their wealth drained by losses they could no longer explain away. As for Caleb, some say he left for the river towns. Others say he stayed until the end, ensuring the door was never closed again. But one thing is certain. No one ever rebuilt the North House. Because once a rule is exposed for what it is, a lie meant to preserve power, it loses the only thing that ever made it work: silence. And on the land where Belle Rive once stood, the ground grows wild now, untamed, unowned, and finally at peace.